Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the compliments.
You're more than welcome.
Good morning, Commissioners, Secretary Vonk. So yeah, Andy and I have our annual mountain lion update put together for you here. We're going to run through a bunch of slides as quick as we can for you, try and keep you on track. Got a little bit of history, some of the other data that we collect. Andy's going to jump into some of the research and then talk to you about our population estimates and where we sit with all of that information. So I'll jump right into it here. Pardon me. So a little bit of history for you. Mountain lions are native to South Dakota, so they were documented in some of the early expeditions, Lewis and Clark, Newton Jenny, the Custer expeditions. Mountain lions were extirpated from South Dakota in the late 1800s, early 1900s. This was largely due to bounties, unregulated hunting, and then also market hunting on prey. So as we knocked out some of those prey species, particularly deer that lions feed on, that worked to extirpate the lions from South Dakota as well. Now there are some documentation of lions as you go through time. There in the 1930s there was a lion that's in the literature that was documented killed up by Castle Creek, and then one in the 1950s on Elk Mountain, lion that was taken there. So you do see some lions popping up over time, but really from the early 1900s there we jumped to 1978 when we list the mountain lions as a state threatened species. This was kind of a push across all of the United States coming from the west. A lot of the states to the west of us listed or protected the lion in the 1960s, late 1960s, early 70s. So kind of following suit there, we list them in 1978 and offer them some protection. Fast forward to 2003, we start to collect some information. Our research starts in 1999. We start to understand that we have a viable breeding population of mountain lions here in South Dakota, and in an effort to start to manage those mountain lions, we take them off that state threatened species list and list them as a big game animal in 2003. And of course, as we'll talk about, our first season was in 2005. I always like to take a moment and point out that, you know, back here when I say unregulated hunting, so unregulated means it's not a structured season, it's just an open season free-for-all. In fact, there were bounties on mountain lions. That's totally different than what we're setting here today and what we're talking about today. So the first regulated structured season on mountain lions was in 2005, so kind of a new thing to South Dakota, if you will. So I want to jump to the management plan really quick. I'm not going to go over the whole plan. I hope you all have had an opportunity to take a look at our mountain lion plan. Specifically, I want to mention the population objective. So we state in the plan that we want to manage for 150 to 200 mountain lions. Now we state a number of reasons, but one that's pretty important right now and that you folks have heard a lot about is that we want to reduce the number of prey species taken by mountain lions, particularly elk, deer, and bighorn sheep. That's been a pretty contentious issue, and that's something that we see as a benefit of reducing this population to 150 to 200 lions. Another one I would point out that's been kind of important lately, and I guess back when we wrote this plan felt it was pretty important, is to maintain a harvest on mountain lions. If you look through the hunter harvest survey that Dr. Longmire conducted for us, you'll see a number of comments in there, and I can tell you that I'm hearing in the field office that folks are starting to really enjoy this hunt. It's off on its own. It's another opportunity for them. They can go out and hunt the mountain lion. That's a pretty unique experience here in South Dakota. So I would just mention that to you, that we feel it's pretty important that we do offer a mountain lion hunting season at some level. Next, I'd like to talk to you about the observation report. So anytime that a lion's reported to one of our game and fish offices or our staff, we do look into that. Now, we might simply just make a phone call to that person and take down the information and enter that into our database. But if there's something more serious or something for us to look at, a track, kill, or worse yet, an attack on livestock or pets, we'll go to the scene there, take a look, and investigate and see what we can figure out what's going on. So what we do is classify these into unfounded, which means that we have information to say that it's not a mountain lion, or unverified, which simply means that I don't have information to say that it is or it isn't a mountain lion. We're not sure. And then, of course, verified, which means that I have some evidence there, a track, hair, a kill, something to say that, yep, there was a mountain lion there, and I consider that a verified. So you could see this goes back to 1995. The red is total reports that we've taken, and the blue is the verified. This increase that you see here, that does correlate well with the increase we show in the mountain lion population, pardon me. And you could see that those reports are dropping off here. Now, I wouldn't put a whole lot into that as it relates to our population estimates, because we know that as people become more comfortable with lions, the more we deal with mountain lions, the tendency they have to not report to us. So take that with a grain of salt. We're not going to see any slight increases or decreases in the population based on these reports. Next, I have the documented mortalities that we collect here. And you can see in the red is the non-harvest mortality, and the blue is the hunter harvest. So again, you see that really sharp curve with that increase in the population. We see a pretty dramatic increase in the number of documented mortalities. And then as of late, you know, both the harvest and maybe more importantly, the non-harvest mortalities have dropped off here. So that does show a decreasing trend. Now, again, not something I would hang my hat on, but it is something that, you know, we'll continue to keep an eye on. Those non-harvest mortalities continue to drop here as we harvest more lions out of this population. Next, I just break down the documented mortalities for you. So if you look at this graph at the top right here first, what we're showing here is just the cause of mortality, and you can see hunter harvest is predominantly what takes up the mortality. You've got removal, vehicle, boy, if I could hold that straight for you, sorry. You know, just hanging in there. And then a whole plethora of others. We've had interactions, illegal kills, a whole number of other reasons that mountain lions are dying. I also threw up the removals here. So one of the benefits that we might see to decreasing the mountain lion population is fewer of those mountain lions that we need to come in and remove for whatever reason, whether they're in town or if they're killed somebody's pet, something like that. And you can see here, since 2009, we do show a decreasing trend. Now again, not something that I'm going to hang my hat on, but it is something that Andy and I and staff have our eye on. We want to continue to watch this and see, are we seeing a correlation there as we decrease this population in the number of removals going down. So just something interesting to keep our eye on there. Next, I apologize for the busyness on this slide, but I do have a few things I just want to point out to you, particularly for the commissioners who may not have this information. So I've got, this is the year of the seasons on this side, licenses sold. And I just point out that last year's season, 2012-13, that was our record license sales, if you will, 4,344. Now, interestingly, our licenses did drop this year by about 1,000, so pretty significant drop there, almost 25%. So we did see participation drop this year. Season dates, I've got those here. Maybe one big thing that I would point out is we used to hunt these lions during the deer and the elk seasons, and then we did switch that to roughly the January 1 to March time frame. Of course, we're starting December 26 as it stands now. And we moved that largely to get away from dealing with shooting females with dependent young and those young kittens that we need to go out and deal with as an abandonment issue. So that really has helped us with that issue and really reduced the opportunity for that occurrence. Here you have the males and females harvested and the total harvest here. I won't go through all that with you. We do have a few harvested on the prairie every year, and so on the prairie just simply means those are animals harvested outside of the Black Hills Fire Protection District, or that Black Hills unit, if you will. And so this last year we've had 2. And then lastly, we have the harvest limits over here. And I would just simply point out that up until the last 2 years, that harvest limit did come into play. So we look at the limit as a threshold. We don't want to go over that limit. It's not necessarily a target or a quota. It's not something that we're striving to reach. It's just a cap, if you will. We don't want to see any more than that harvested. So that did come into play all the way up into the last 2 seasons. So the 2012, 2013, and the 13-14 season, it was the season dates that closed the season, not those harvest limits. So we didn't get there. I want to take a quick moment here while I'm on this slide to just mention to you, I'm sure a lot of the commissioners heard about some of the kittens in the harvest this year, and the fact of the matter is we've had kittens harvested the last few years. Now, all of those kittens that were harvested, we did look into those. We had an officer take a look and staff, and we did determine that those were legal lions, so those hunters didn't act illegally. So I want to point that out. That's important to note. But we did hear from the public and from hunters, and quite frankly, some of those hunters that came in and checked in those kittens, you could see that they thought they had a bigger animal. They came in, and when we weighed it and told them, oh, you know, it's 30 pounds, they thought they had an 80-pound mountain lion. What that told us is that probably we could assist our hunters in better identifying sex and age class of mountain lions. And so what you see in front of you here is our effort to put out a education piece, if you will. This is going to be located on our website. We are going to try and direct our lion hunters to this publication, if you will, and just offer them some information to help them better determine the sex, age, and size of a mountain lion. Again, we're not saying that those hunters acted illegally and that they can't shoot the lions they did, but we want to make sure that they have all that information in their back pocket so they can make a good estimate out in the field when they're looking to harvest that mountain lion. So continuing on here, I do have some the results from Dr. Longmire's Black Hills Mountain Lion Survey. As I mentioned, 3,293 licenses this year. All of those individuals were surveyed, and we had a 74% response rate. You can see that just over half of those reported spending some time hunting mountain lions this year. We had an average of 6.9 days hunted for each of those individuals. And the success per active hunter, so these are the people that actually participated, was 2.4%. Now I did break out Custer State Park, 136 access permits. We did survey all of them again. A little bit better response rate, 86%. And again, a few more of those folks reported spending time hunting mountain lions, 68%. And that success per active hunter, now remember we allow hounds in Custer State Park, so 53% success with those hounds in Custer State Park. And I'd point out that that demonstrates to us how successful houndsmen can be. Obviously they're getting out there and they're able to find those lions and be more successful in the field. And then of course the boot hunt was 1.3% success. Next, I'll just jump to Custer State Park, give you a few of the stats on CSP down there. We did start hunting mountain lions in 2011. So prior to that, Custer State Park was closed. Now the first season, what we did is issue 10 licenses and then operated that as a separate season from the main season. There was no hounds, and we ended up harvesting 2 individuals there, 1 male, 1 female. Now in 2012, we moved that Custer State Park season into the regular season. So it's part of our total harvest limit and part of the main Black Hills season with the access permits. So we divided into periods to spread those folks out in the park so we don't have a crowding issue, and then issue the access permits and allow them to hunt. 4 females harvested in 2012. We continue with those periods in 2013, but we add hounds in. So we add 3 hound periods, and as you can see, that obviously boosts our success. So we harvest 7 mountain lions that year, 6 with hounds. And then of course to present, we have 4 periods without hounds, 4 periods with hounds, and 9 lions harvested this year, 8 of which with the hounds. So again, that I think demonstrates how successful we could be with hounds if we allowed that anywhere else. Next, I just have a map of the harvest locations. We do this every year to just kind of look at where those lay on the landscape there. And you can see pretty consistent with previous years. We've got a pretty good spread across the Black Hills here. We do see a little bit of a gap up here. That's something that we see generally every year. And the biggest reason for that is that's where the deep snow is. That's where the snowpack is. It's hard to get in, pretty inaccessible. There is, of course, a bit of a void down here, and I don't have a real good explanation for that other than, there was not as good as snow conditions down in that area. It's possible that their densities are down in that area. That could be one indication of what's going on, but yeah, there's just a bit of a gap down here as well. But again, pretty consistent with what we're seeing the last few years. Last, or not last, but I'd like to talk to you about the snowfall events. Every year we have some discussion about snow and how that impacts the season. And I'll tell you that absolutely, if there's snow on the ground, that benefits our hunters. They're able to track the mountain lions. It makes for better conditions. They're more successful, no doubt about it. This doesn't mean much in the way of what we do with mountain lion management, but just interesting information to look at. So what I'm showing you here is we have 6 weather stations from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Holy cow, thank you. And we went with these 6 stations because they have a good, consistent long-term data set. There are other stations, but there's gaps in the data, so we threw those out because we didn't feel that they were as accurate as these 6 stations. Now, an event is defined as receiving at least 1 inch of snow daily. And you can see since 2009, we've laid those events out for you. And ironically, 2014, we had 85 events, just the same as we did last year. Now that it shuffles around a bit amongst these stations. But I guess the take home here is that we did have good snow conditions this last year. So there were some good tracking conditions throughout the season. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lindblom.
All right, switching gears here. Now we're going to talk a little bit about some lion research in South Dakota. We began research in 1998 through South Dakota State University. This is actually a pretty heavily researched lion population. We've marked about 380 lions throughout the course of time here since 1998 to now, so quite a few lions have been marked. We're currently tracking 25 radio-collared animals. 15 for sure. It's not all black and white when you're tracking lions. They kind of come and go, but we've got about 10 out there that are questionable, but last time we flew, we were at 15, but I expect to pick up a few more, but some of those are either dispersed or we have some collar failure too. Some of those have been on for quite a while. And then, as you saw yesterday, Dr. Jinks presented, we have 2 research projects that just finished up, so we're excited to see the results of those and start learning from those projects. And then we have a project going on ourselves, being led by our wildlife biologist, Steve Griffin out of Rapid City. Basically, we're looking at estimating abundance and trends of lions. Primarily, we're looking at our DNA work again and looking at biopsied Arctic lions. And this is building off of the research that you heard from yesterday and trying to see what we learned from that research and improving that and continuing to look at that technique. Related to lion research, of course, is elk research, because elk are a prey item of lions, and we do have 2 elk research projects that are just wrapping up here. So these data are preliminary, but it's always an important point of discussion when we talk about lions, so I thought I'd present some brief data results here. Again, they're preliminary, but we had a study that's finishing up in Custer State Park by Chad Lehman. He was the project leader for that study, and then in Unit 2, SDSU again, Dr. Jinks and Ben Simpson was the master student there. And both of those studies were companion studies looking at movements, nutrition, and reproduction. But what I'm going to talk about here and kind of show you some of the data is on the survival data, and that's what a lot of folks are interested in. So this is just a brief table looking at some of the summary data on survival. And so we have the years here, CSP in the Unit 2 study area. So our cow survival, here's our number captured. But our annual cow survivals kind of vary between 80 and 90% between the 2 study areas. Not too bad. But what has been of most interest to the public and to us as well, looking at a population management standpoint, is this calf elk survival and some of the variation we've seen in that. And you can see in CSP, these last couple years we've been around the mid-20s, 25% or so calf survival, a little bit of variation between years though, but the bottom line is the calf survival we've seen in Unit 2 has been significantly lower than the calf survival calf survival in CSP has been lower than the calf survival that we've seen in Unit 2. So our calf survival in Unit 2 has been around the mid-60s or so last couple of years, so much better calf survival in that area than what we see in CSP. So that's kind of the take-home message there. The bulk of our elk are in Unit 2 or in that area. When we did our winter count, about 75% of the animals we counted in the hills were in that Unit 2, so it's good we have some good calf survival in that area. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of show some of those preliminary results there. So the next thing I want to jump into is the different variables that we look at and analyze and try to evaluate when we're looking at what the population's doing, what's the trend of the population. And I want to emphasize trend here. All these data sets that we're going to talk about today our trend data. And trend data isn't good from one year to the next. You got to have more than 2 points. You got to look at 3 or more. So continue to look at that long-term trend, even if it goes one way or goes way up or way down. Still look at that long-term trend. And if it goes a different direction one year and it continues to do that, then that tells you something from a trend standpoint. But keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that any one of these by themselves we would never hang our hat on, but let's look collectively at the whole and what do the majority of them tell us the lion population is doing out there. So with that said, let's kind of jump into it, and we'll start with some hunter harvest data. Everybody's always interested in hunter success. Of course, we look at that with all of our big game species. So our lion hunter success is pretty low, obviously. This is a low success hunt. You know, we're averaging around that 1.5. I think we topped out at about 2% a couple years there, but you know, we're bouncing between that 1.5–2% hunter success. Another thing we look at is this the pink line here, and that's the harvest per day. You can see that's trended down here over the last few years. You know, harvest per day can be influenced by more than just the number of lions out there. Obviously, a big influence on harvest per day is, well, how many hunters do you have out there, how many licensees, and how many of those guys that bought licenses actually hunted. So we don't put a lot of weight in that harvest per day. We actually look a little bit deeper into that, and we look at a harvest per unit effort. And Cynthia Longmire, the harvest report that John mentioned, she does every year. She surveys our lion hunters. So we have a number of licensed lion hunters, but we also have, more importantly, is the number of those people that bought licenses, how many of them actually hunted. So here's how many licenses we sold up to the end of the lion season. We only had about 1,800 of those folks actually hunted lions. So that's a really important statistic in trying to evaluate harvest per unit effort. So we have those data we can look at, and then we have average number of days per hunter, and we can calculate total number of man days hunted, and then we can break that into a harvest per 1,000 man days hunted. And here's what that looks like over time. We did see a bump up this year, but I would stress that, you know, we're still on a downward trend. We did come up, but we didn't come up as far as we did in 2012, but it did come up a little bit. Now, I don't know if it was last commission meeting or a couple commission meetings ago, Commissioner Spies asked us about hunter experience, and are we seeing a lot more experienced lion hunters out there, and how does that impact some of the things that we look at? And that's a really good question, and it was a really good challenge, and I told them we'd take a look at it and do what we could, and some of our data are, we can't tease out all of our data because a lot of our hunter surveys, you remain anonymous. Your results are not associated with your name, so some of our data we can't go back and query per hunter, but we can look at some things. And one of the things we looked at is novice hunters. So we're defining a novice hunter as a first and one-time license holder. So folks that that's the only time they ever bought a lion license. So, you know, there's not a lot of trend there, but what we do see interesting is in 2013, when we had a record number of license sales, we had a big jump in number of novice hunters. And when you go back and look at the data I just presented, well, if you have a big jump in the number of novice hunters, you would expect back in 2013 your actual harvest per unit effort to decrease if you had a bunch of novice hunters out there. So maybe that explains that little dip we saw there. Maybe this should have been somewhere in the middle to a little bit more straight, who knows, but thought we'd present that. It's kind of interesting to look at. I have a few more statistics here to look at related to hunter experience. We've had 372 hunters, hunter harvested lions throughout the course of our season since 2005. And here's the number of lions have been harvested looking at individual hunters. So, you know, 283 of those hunters have harvested one lion. Then you can see we have a couple dozen hunters out there who have actually harvested 2 lions. And you can see it kind of goes, you know, the number of hunters obviously goes down when you talk about more lions. But there's a few folks out there that have harvested a few lions, so it's kind of interesting to look at. Next thing I want to talk about is some of the data that and coordination efforts that we do with Wyoming. Of course, part of the Black Hills is in Wyoming as well as South Dakota. So we coordinate with Wyoming about what their data look like and what they're seeing for lion populations. And one of the data sets that we share and we look at together is we look at human-caused lion mortalities. So these are all the mortalities that we have documented from hunter harvest to other vehicle accidents to whatever that have been human-caused. So we actually know those animals. So this is looking at mortalities per 1,000 square kilometers. from 2007 to 2013. And this statistic is based on research in Wyoming, in the Snowies, where they saw, when they did their research, when you saw between 5 and 8 human-caused lion mortalities per 1,000 square kilometers, you basically had a stable lion population. But when you got above that, you were getting into the lion population, and you were going to decrease that population. When you got below that, your lion population was probably going to increase. So again, this is based on research in Wyoming. Wyoming does have a different harvest strategy than we do. You know, they use hounds throughout the state. That's selective harvest. Individuals can look at the lion before they shoot it. They can sometimes sex it, sometimes get an idea whether it's a big lion or a small lion. So there is some selection going on there, versus ours, boot hunters, not near the amount of opportunity to select on that lion. So there's some difference in data sets. You know, maybe if you looked in South Dakota, we got a pretty good density of lions compared to some of the other populations. Maybe this threshold will be up a little bit. But the bottom line is we've been well above that threshold for quite a few years now. I'm suggesting that when you look at all the mortalities throughout the Black Hills, we should be impacting that lion population. So the different colors here, I know it's kind of hard to see, but you know, the South Dakota's in this light blue here, so you can see where we've been there. You know, the whole ecosystem together is this tan line. It kind of gives you an idea, though, between Wyoming and both of us, what we're seeing for lion mortality throughout the hills. Another thing that both Wyoming and South Dakota looks at is our lion harvest composition. And you've seen some of these data before, but this is in a format that Wyoming uses, and we put our data in it because we're talking about coordinating some of the different variables that we look at. And Wyoming looks at this percent of adult females in the harvest. And what they're looking at is no more than 20 to 25% adult females in the harvest. When you get above that, your lion population is going to start decreasing. So looking at our harvest composition data here, and just again, this is over the years, this is percentage, so these are all going to add up to 100. So the dark colors are the adults, and the lighter colors are the subadults. So the dark red adult female, adult male is a dark blue, and then same type of scenario for the subadults. So what they're looking at is this red, the percent of the harvest that's adult females, and looking at that threshold of 20 to 25%, which is, you know, we've been well above that for quite a few years now. And we've talked about that before. You guys have seen this graph before, and we look at the same type of thing. This is probably a little clearer. This is the only variable you're looking at. This is the percent of adult females in the harvest. We've taken 3-year averages, trying to look at a little bit better at trend data. You know, it does appear to trend up, but maybe we've leveled out here in the last few years. But the bottom line is we're well above that 20 to 25%, and we have been for quite a long time here, and a population can only sustain that for so long. So we are harvesting heavy on those females, which is important if we want to bring the population down to our management objective. You know, I put some research down in here. It's not just Wyoming. There's other states that look at this magic 25% threshold as well. That's a reported threshold in quite a few areas. So again, we're well above that. Last year we were at 32% adult female harvest, which is pretty heavy. Another thing we look at is female survival. Since we've had animals that have radio collars on them, we are able to gather that statistic and look at the annual survival of our female lions out there. You can see over time here, the last 3 years, we've ranged from 64 to 72%. Those aren't statistically different, so we've been in that 60 to 70% survival. You go to the literature and look at what type of survival rates can a lion population sustain, and normally they're saying that you're going to see a decreasing lion population when that female survival drops down to these types of levels, and we've been at those types of levels, if not lower. So, you know, some research says when survival gets down to 75 or 85%, your populations are going to decrease. Well, we've been well below that for quite a while here. Other ones say 80, another research project says 77, and one says 66, and we've been pretty close to that one, obviously. So the last thing we look at, and what everybody likes to see, is an actual population estimate. As difficult as that is to do with a small population, we make that attempt. So the first thing I want to talk about is our population estimate using radio-collared lions. So our estimate numbers are going to be for approximately January 1 of 2014. So we estimate adults using Lincoln-Peterson mark recapture methods. We only look at adults, remember, because we have very few subadults collared out there. So all we can really do is estimate the adult population. But then we go back and we estimate the subadult population based on the harvest composition. We use 3-year averages to estimate that subadult percentages. And then we estimate kittens based on some previous research looking at pregnancy rates, the sex and age composition of the population, average litter size, kitten survival, what have you. We use those statistics to come up with our kitten estimate. So at the start of the 2014 season, we had 26 radio-collared lions, 22 that were adults and 4 subadults. So 22 adults is what we're going to use for our estimate. And then in our return, we had 5 radio-collared lions. They're all adults that were returned in the harvest. So here's what our estimate looks like. Kind of go through it here piece by piece. So again, we had these 22 collared adult lions available for harvest at the beginning of the season, actually beginning on December 26. We ended up with 24 lions harvested. This is adults only. Remember, we're looking at adults. And then we had 5 radio-collared adults returned in the harvest for our Lincoln-Peterson modified estimate of 96 adult lions. So here's our estimate. You add your 95% confidence intervals, basically plus or minus 50% almost here. Pretty wide confidence intervals, but that's what you have to deal with on a small population size. And then we estimate the subadults for our total adult subadult population of about 180. So that's where we would have been. Our estimate puts us at the beginning of 2014. We add in our kittens, and we're approaching about 240 total lions. And I'm sure there'll be lots of discussion on that, and we'll surely entertain that, but I'm going to jump on to our DNA estimate. We also estimate our lion population, like I mentioned, using DNA marked animals. And you heard yesterday Dr. Jinks talk about the study. We're continuing to build on that and modify that method so that we can try and use that for a population estimate. So here's basically our pilot year study on what we got for DNA marked estimates. So we hired a contract houndsman, came in and biopsy darted lions for us. In addition, we had Wyoming Game and Fish. They provided a houndsman and hounds to come over and do this as well. Our houndsman did a little bit, but Jack Alexander was he was pretty preoccupied doing radio-collared lions, so that's more than a full-time job. So we had a couple houndsmen come in. They sampled for 21 days leading up to the season. Now, when I say sampled, again, that they biopsy darted lions, so they take their hounds out, get on a lion, tree it, and they shoot it with a biopsy dart, which basically it shoots it into the muscle. When the lion's in the tree, the dart falls out of the lion, and we have a tissue sample from that. So we don't actually handle the lion. They just tree him, dart him, grab the dart, and we let him go. Or we do nothing else, we leave. So it's a little more hands-off than trying to collar a lion, obviously, and drug it and bring it out of the tree and collar it and all that. So they sampled for 21 days, and we ended up getting 26 DNA samples, which is pretty good. We putting this together for the pilot year and just a couple of houndsmen. We had one sample that wasn't good enough to get DNA. We had a couple lions that were sampled twice. Of course, these folks don't know that when they sample a lion, they tree them, and 2 weeks later it could be the same lion, and we had that happen a couple times. And then we had 6 kittens that we removed from the analyses because we're not estimating kittens using this technique. So this technique will give us an estimate of adults and subadults. It's different than the collared estimate where we only estimate adults right off the bat because we can't differentiate between adults and subadults when we biopsy dart the lion. We don't actually have it in our hands, so we combine those two categories. So here's what we have. So we had 17 DNA samples available for analysis. Our total return, our harvest was 47 adult subadults, and this is a bigger number obviously because we can look at subadults as well. We ended up getting four adult subadult lions in the harvest that had been DNA biopsy darted. So our total estimate for adults and subadults using the DNA techniques is 173. Again, you can see our confidence interval, quite large there. We added in the kittens, and our total estimate for the population is 234, pretty comparable to what our lion collar estimate was. So this is how it looks put all together, looking at, again, we like to look at trend here, looking at trend data. So here's our adult, subadult lion population estimates using mark recapture methods over time. These are our collared Lincoln-Peterson estimates. And you can see we have been going down. We have a little bit of a blurb up here, but I want to emphasize our wide confidence intervals. So briefly, I want to explain what that means when we have confidence intervals like this. Our estimate is this, but from a statistics standpoint, based on our sample sizes, based on the variability of the data set, a statistician would tell you you are 95% confident that your true population is between those bounds. So it could be anywhere between those bounds. So obviously you want those as narrow as possible when you're trying to estimate a population. But that's where our Lincoln-Peterson radial collared estimate came in. This is where our DNA estimate came in. And those are the confidence intervals around the DNA estimate, a little bit larger there. We did remember have, it was a pilot year. We had kind of a small sample size going into the study. And then for last year, this is what the model prediction was. As you remember, we used a model to predict what the population would be, and the model prediction was a little bit lower than what both of these estimates are, but definitely well within the confidence intervals. So just to kind of wrap up my part here on future lion monitoring, again, we're going to continue to monitor long-term trends here. I want to emphasize that these are trend data. No matter what one year does to the next, look at the long-term trend. And we do need to expect large confidence intervals anytime we attempt to estimate a population, whether it's lions or whatever, that's this small, or 100 or 300, I don't care what it is. You're using mark recapture methods to estimate something that small. There just isn't any way you can get around some large confidence intervals. But there are some ways you can try to narrow those up, and we've done some more digging and trying to figure out, okay, what type of sample sizes do we really need if we want to get an estimate that's plus or minus 25%? Because right now we're plus or minus 40 to 50% the last 3 years in a row. And we've been collaring like heck as much as we can. And that's about where we've been at, plus or minus 40 to 50%. And that makes it kind of tough when you have that much variability in your estimates. So we've done some more digging and trying to figure out actually identifying what type of sample we would need to move forward with radial collared lions and doing Lincoln-Peterson estimates. And we'd need, approximately 60 adult lions collared, which is really probably not an attainable number to get to, considering, we were at, what, 22 adults collared this year at the start of the season. It's probably not realistic. So we dug a little further into the DNA technique, and the difference between the collars and the DNA is we can use subadults as well. So that does affect our sample size, what we need, but more importantly, that sample size is affected in that return number. So that in the harvest, we can look at both adults and subadults. Well, we'd need about 50 DNA marked animals, adults and subadults, to reach that plus or minus 25% level of precision. So looking at those data, we are going to be switching over from radial collared lions to doing more DNA stuff. And this is building off of what Dr. Jinks talked about yesterday. Now remember, they DNA marked lions throughout the year. We're not proposing to do that, and he reported some of the issues with that and trying to estimate availability, and that was problematic. And so, but we're building on that. We learned something there. What we're going to do is try, and we're going to put all the emphasis right before the season to DNA mark these animals, biopsy dart them. That way we'll assume that most of them are available for the harvest. So we're moving to that, and a lot of that basically, like I mentioned, is an effect of sample size and what we need to reach to get to that plus or minus 25% level of precision. And with that, I'll turn it over to John to wrap up.
Yeah, just a couple more slides here. As Andy mentioned, we do coordinate with Wyoming Game and Fish. We hold a coordination meeting every year, and then we're on the phone and chatting with them and emailing back and forth, just sharing our data and understanding what's going on in each side of the line. Because as Andy mentioned, we do consider this one lion population. The Black Hills are one ecosystem, if you will. So it's important that we coordinate and cooperate with those folks. What I have up here for you is just what we saw for the mountain lion season over in Wyoming in the northeast corner. So primarily these 3 units here, so that'd be 1, 30 and 32 in the northeast corner. Of course, they do have this 24 here as well, which is more or less a prairie unit, if you'll allow me. It's similar to what we have as you move outside of the Black Hills in South Dakota. There are a few lions harvested there, and generally they're up against the Black Hills, the Bear Lodge there. But this is how it shakes out. So they had the same harvest limits and season dates as they did in the previous season. And I have the total harvest laid out for you here over the last 4 years. They saw a little bit of a dip this year. They went down to 66 from 70 last year. But I guess I would point out that if you take that 66 that they harvested this year, put that with the 53 that we harvested here in South Dakota, so all in all 119 cats out of the Black Hills ecosystem. And maybe just as a comparison, so speaking with Dan Thompson, who's the senior trophy game biologist in Wyoming, they had a total harvest in all of the state of Wyoming of 306 lions. So you consider we're harvesting 119 over here in this ecosystem. I mean, close to 40% of what they're harvesting all said and done in Wyoming. Just points out that we do have a significant harvest over here, and we're having an impact on this population. Last, I'll just throw our recommendation at you. So what the department is recommending to the commission is no change for the 2014-15 season. When we look at all this information that we presented to you, all the trends, as Andy mentioned, and again, a lot of those are trends that we need to keep our eye on and see what happens next year and get more of that, more data points and more of that long-term evaluation. We feel like a no change to the population or no change to the season would be beneficial to continue to monitor those and see where we go. So what that would mean is for the Black Hills, a total harvest limit of 75 mountain lions or a sublimit of 50 female lions, and then we would keep the same access permits, 4 periods with 30 boot hunters, and then 4 periods with 4 hound hunters in Custer State Park. And with that, Andy and I are prepared to take any questions you might have.
Questions? Scott?
Yes, I have one. Good information, by the way. My compliments. A lot of work down there. The 1,058 less licenses sold. Do you attribute that to people getting tired of hunting lions, the novelties wanting? What do you contribute that to?
I'll start, I guess. Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if we have a solid answer, but we have some theories out there. And I guess, you know, the year prior, you know, we went to 100 harvest limit, and we had we sold a record number of licenses that year. I think a lot of folks thought we're really going to get on that lion population. Now is the time. We're probably at, you know, some of the most dense lion populations we've had in recent history. There's a lot of licenses available, unlimited availability out there, but the harvest limit was up there. I think folks really wanted to take advantage of that. And you could see that in the spike of novice hunters. A lot of people that never hunted lions really participated when we had that harvest limit of 100. So to me, that I have an easier time explaining why it dipped up than why it might have dipped down. And so I guess that would be my explanation.
Yeah, I totally agree. And just maybe to add anecdotally, I had a number of folks come to me and say, you know, I'm going to get a license this year and get my lion now because I'm afraid I might not have an opportunity in the future. Anecdotal, but I think that was what a lot of the spike was due to.
With this downward, we won't call it a trend, with this dip, has there been any thought, would this be a good time to consider a couple hundred out-of-state licenses for lion hunting in South Dakota? We're seeing it dip. It's unlimited. It isn't going to affect our sportsmen. The people that want to reduce the lion population, the sportsmen that like to hunt elk and deer, would all be for it. It'd be a good thing for the economy of the Black Hills to bring a couple hundred out-of-staters in. Would this be a good time to consider 200 or 300 out-of-state licenses for lions in South Dakota?
I'm going to cop out on that one, Commissioner Phillips, but I would say I think that's a worthy discussion the Commission could have, and I wouldn't have any objections to that.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. You know, biologically, it's irrelevant whether or not you want to add some non-residents in there or not. It's, you know, it doesn't matter whether a resident or a non-resident harvests a lion from my data management standpoint.
Kathy?
You mentioned that you're not going to do so much collaring anymore. Is that just in general you won't, or will you still use it to track their patterns and stuff?
So yeah, right now we don't have any active research projects going on through SDSU. So we will not be collaring lions. The only project we're looking at right now is to further evaluate the DNA population estimate method. So we're going to focus all our efforts on that. It's a lot more cost effective, more time efficient. It takes a lot of time to collar lions year round. So we're going to focus all our attention on that, and we think we can have a much better chance of obtaining the sample sizes we needed for a more precise estimate. So we're gonna try that this year.
We'll continue to monitor the lions that we do have on the air until those collars die out. Yep.
Thank you. It's a good report.
Given, I just had one observation. You guys tell me if I'm accurate, okay? You always have, trusting that you will. Kind of to put this in summary, at least for me, given the fact with this high confidence interval that we, in essence, would be on the high end of the population goal and objective for the management plan. We're looking at 150 to 200 is our population goal and objective. Our estimates based upon both the collaring data and the DNA sampling data would indicate that we're somewhere around 230, 235 or so in that area. I recognize that with that high confidence interval, we're probably in the safe range by making the same proposal for this year's season as we have the last, and Andy's data shows that definitely would be, that would be where we would be pursuing a number, even if we don't reach the harvest cap. That number should fit in with where we're going to stay within our goal and objectives for both total lion population and the, I'm going to guess, the adult, sub-adult kitten ratios, right? Is that the way to say that?
Yes.
Okay, so if we have a slight trending upward in the overall population, which you guys have noted in your, we're going up and down as we manage over the last 10 years. Okay, yeah, the one with the, there you go. So the obvious question to a lot of folks, or the discussion around the coffee tables, would be, how does this slight upward trend relate to our goals and objectives for elk and deer and bighorn sheep? Now, John's presentation, Dr. Jenks' presentation, certainly indicates that the vast majority of the mountain lion prey, mountain lion's food is deer with some elk in there, and your information confirms that. So my getting to the point of this is the general public, especially the sportsmen, are going to say, please watch this, so that you get closer to the lower end of the population goal and objective as opposed to the higher end of the population goal. Am I making sense? So I just wanted to let you know that that's some of the discussion that goes on, and consequently, and most folks don't think in terms of your confidence interval and looking at in terms of where you are in that. They're just looking at hard numbers. And so I'm just pointing that out to you, that that's some of the stuff that we will get here. And so I would just say I'm comfortable with where you guys are personally. You're the experts on this. But the reaction will be, let's make sure that line doesn't just keep on creeping up over the top of the hill. Yep. So go ahead, Jim. I just wanted to.
John, you had a slide on there earlier where where the mountain lions were harvested.
The mortality slide and showed harvest?
And then in the southwest part of that slide, you mentioned, you know, the high snowpack and whatever, and you don't go back, it's nowhere land.
There.
Yeah, you'll see that, we know there's mountain lions out there, a few, you know, the tough ones. But it'd be interesting on that slide, during the season, where the elk are, you know, they're all down, and, you know, that's easier hunting territory for the lions, I'm assuming. The deer, the elk, and the sheep, right?
During this time period, you're saying it's easier?
During the mountain lion hunting season, because it's the end of our other seasons. So, you know, if you had an overlay map, here's where the elk are now, here's where the sheep are now, here's the majority of the deer, you know, they're not gonna be chest deep in snow. They head down into that country. I'm sure that's where the population of our critters are, isn't it?
Where the lions are, that they're following the prey is what you're suggesting?
Easy go. It's an easy hunt.
Yeah, I certainly think that we're seeing some prey following, you know, as those, the ungulates in particular, the deer and the elk shift out of those higher areas. I believe that the lions follow too. Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead, Barry.
Good report. I think I gain more confidence in your numbers and stuff all the time.
With a high confidence interval.
Yes, kidding. We won't go there. But as far as the number of hunters, you know, that 4,000 to 33 or whatever, is it safe to say that probably most people that have a elk or deer license, do they say, well, just give me a lion license just in case I see one out there? I mean, I would think that would be a kind of a logical.
Yeah, and of course, remember, Commissioner Jensen, remember that we used to run the season concurrent with the elk season, then with the deer season, and we saw quite a bit of participation. In fact, you know, we met the harvest limit in a relatively short period of time. So I think the indication would be that a fair number of folks, yeah, they would pick up the lion license in the event that they might see a lion. Of course, we do survey our deer and elk hunters every year, and that is one of the questions, I believe, that we ask them, did you see a lion while hunting elk or deer? And, you know, we have a few of those indicate every year that they did, so that would give those folks an opportunity to take that lion if they were out hunting those other critters.
And then in Wyoming, how long has Wyoming been, they've been hunting lions for what?
Boy, to my knowledge, at least since the 70s, late 70s, I believe.
And they use hounds everywhere?
Yep. Yes.
And are their numbers pretty stable? Do they have pretty stable numbers of cats over there?
You know, of course, they don't estimate their lion population. They work off of the information that Andy presented to you. So they look at kind of trends and mortality, and then of course that percent of adult female in the harvest. And you know, we talked with Dan Thompson the other day, and he indicated that he believed we had a decreasing population in the Bear Lodge. I'm not sure about the rest of Wyoming. So I think working off their trend indicators, they believe the population is decreasing, but they don't have a number.
Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you.
But just to add to that, I mean, they also felt that their population increased when we felt our lion population was increasing, and they, as you could see in John's slide, they did up those harvest limits to try and address that. They wanted to harvest more lions, that they wanted to bring that population down. So there's been some similar trends in what, at least what the biologists feel the lion population is doing, and some of our management approaches too. So.
Do they have a limit then on
Yep.
the whole state, or?
Well, they manage by units, and if you remember that unit map, they have harvest limits per unit, you know, and there's a few areas like the prairie area, similar to ours, that's, you know, there's not a limit on there, but yeah, most of their management units will have an actual harvest limit.
Go ahead, Dwayne.
You know, say you had the one slide on the elk mortality for calving, and is there a reason for Custer Park to be so low compared to the rest of the Black Hills? Wasn't that down to like 25% as opposed to like 65?
Yep, and that was part of the research, is to not only quantify what the survival rates were, but to look at cause-specific mortality. And I don't want to talk on behalf of, this is Chad Lehman's research project, but what he did see is a lot of lion predation in that study, and versus in Unit 2 we didn't see that much. And you can see some of the numbers there for cause-specific mortality. It's kind of hard to read, I apologize. But the actual numbers reported, number of lions or number of calves lost to lions, and you can see that in CSP there were a lot more calves lost to lions. And if you recall, I don't know if you remember, during every elk proposal we go over all of our fall herd classification data where we quantify calf to cow ratios, and we see that in different areas. Some areas we'll see really low calf to cow ratios, and some areas higher. But hills wide, we're usually around that 50 calves per 100 cows. So we really had a strong feeling that calf survival couldn't be that low across the hills, but it was nice to do this study and actually see what it was in other areas. So CSP is an area with lower calf survival.
Should we, excuse me, should we be harvesting more lions in the park to get that survival rate up?
Yeah, sure. That's a question we've been asking ourselves for a while here, and as you can see, with bringing in hounds and increasing every year, we've incrementally increased the number of licenses available to hunters in CSP to harvest more lions. This last year, we harvested 9 lions in CSP. That's a pretty small area. One's got to wonder how long that population, you can call it a population, but that area can sustain that high level of harvest before hunter success really starts to drop. Now we're always going to have lions moving around, so we're not going to wipe them out. But it'll be interesting to see if we can sustain that type of hunter success with that many lions being harvested. And I don't have the answer for you. I could speculate, but I'd prefer not to. So.
Okay, we'll have to move along. You guys did a great job. I really appreciate the effort that goes into this and distilling all the numbers and then making it understandable for us on this. Really, really well done. Tom, you ready
Mr.
to
Chairman,
go?
again, just looking at the booklet here of the department recommendation of no change to the mountain lion season as it currently is structured. Again, just want to point out to you, the commission, a very similar scenario to yesterday when we talked about the bobcat season with if you move forward with no recommended change, that end result also would be that at next month's commission meeting, there would be no public comment or a public hearing on the particular season, as it would be finalized today if no action was taken. So I just wanted to remind you of that action in the rule process, Mr. Chairman.
That'd be great. We're in good shape. We won't need a vote on this. We'll for the proposal, since there's no change from last year. And we appreciate the effort and the time you guys have put into this. And once again, just watch where it goes in the upper portion of that range, because I think that's an issue for the vast majority of the public.
We will, Mr. Chairman. It's high on the radar.
Okay. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well done. Okay, Doug, Hofer, let's move into Parks and Recreation and item 10.